let's start. Thank you. As I said earlier, Morgan Long from the Navy is unable to attend. He's been ordered to go somewhere else. So it's just the three of us. But that gives me the chance to offer you the opportunity to ask questions from the two presentations we saw earlier. So can I see any hands who wants to ask anything to either of the panelists?
Oh, there's two.
Two? That's good. I'll bring you a microphone.
Hi, thank you very much. I had a question around the kind of generative AI side of things, and you mentioned these biases that get introduced.
Yeah.
How do you go about rebiasing a system?
Yeah.
And is that something you can do?
Yeah, that's a very important question and a good one. So the question basically is, how did we allow for bias in our data sets, and what did we do to fix that? So I had another conversation just now over the coffee break about that exact thing. So the unique thing about Shutterstock in the computer vision world, and the reason that we were so centrally placed for the generative explosion, and the reason why all of the generative companies are buying content from Shutterstock, is because the unique business model that Shutterstock has. So Shutterstock is effectively a marketplace. So people can go on, upload photographs, add labels to those photographs, and then Shutterstock could then try and license and sell them. So over the last 15 years, Shutterstock have got a lot of technology to check the accuracy of those labels, to check the appropriateness of the labels, and that we haven't got sort of lazy, cliched titles in there. So it's checked by humans and checked for accuracy. So what that means is, over the last 15 years, Shutterstock has actually built the world's largest and most accurate set of metadata. So for a second, we stop thinking about photographs as images and start thinking of them as data sources. Each image has got something like 70 metadata tags on. So our first step was to just analyze all of the labels that we had on the images, and that very quickly showed us we had a disproportionate amount of white males compared to Native American women, for etc. I mean, we literally had a list that you could go down. So we were then able to go out to our contributor community, sort of the 4 million contributors all around the world, and say, hey, we need more pictures from these locations, we need more pictures of these things, and we asked them to send them to us, and we were able to gather in millions of images in a few weeks. And then, of course, the other thing to do was to take stuff out, to balance it out. But it wasn't just the volume of content, it was also some of the descriptions we were slightly uncomfortable with. Because these are people that have put these labels on, and then the AI learns from those labels. And the thing that I think everyone needs to understand about AI is it doesn't make ethical decisions. It's not designed to make ethical decisions. It makes mathematical ones. We have to put the ethics in it. So when it actually starts reading some of the interpretations that humans have, we started to see some rather uncomfortable language around how certain ethnicities had been described. Beauty, for example, was a very obvious one. If you type beauty, it would always be a woman of a certain age. You never see a man described as beautiful. So it was things like that. So we had to do a lot of engineering to ensure the labels were balanced, that the content volume was correct, and make sure that there wasn't any sort of inherent human bias in the description tone.
Thank you very much. Who was the second person with a hand? Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Keep him running around.
Oh, I need the exercise.
Yeah.
So this is about the project management side of things. So to Kate. So one of the things in our organisation is that when we talk to customers, so we're a services organisation, but putting that to one side, they'll often say, yeah, we want to implement some technology. They'll have come to us, they've looked at the tech, make it happen. And you're like, okay, but we need to talk about adoption and change. Yeah. And also then we'll be like, oh, we'll manage the project. Yeah, we'll manage that. How do you find, and it was interesting your honesty, so thank you for that. Is that something you've learned, that actually you really do need that project management? Because again, some people go, yeah, it's not really a project. And you're like, it is really a project because it has an outcome and a defined start and end date. So is that something that you do generally, but for that project, it didn't kind of work that way? What was the...
So we typically, for an implementation, we'd always run it like a project because there is a start and an end date. We do try to adopt sort of iterative approaches to that. So we try to deliver things in increments rather than like a big bang deployment. But I think the ones that have worked the best in the past is where you've kind of got a project manager both in Secret Escapes, but also with the partner, because you guys are the experts of like actually what does an implementation look like in general. We're the experts of our business context, how we work, our stakeholders. And I think if you've particularly got a kind of a short implementation period, I think you need both forces involved to make it work quickly, because you guys are not going to be able to get up to scratch enough to understand the politics or what's going on or what's the future plan, what happened 6 months ago, to really be able to be successful. So I do think it's a partnership in that sense, that you should probably have people on both sides. My experience as well, that the partners we've worked with, I don't think it's typical until more recently that people are kind of insisting that they're more involved as the buyer in the process. I think typically it's been like, okay, you just kind of turn up and say yes to stuff. But I think more people have had challenges and are more inclined to be more involved in the process than they used to be.
Any last questions from the earlier sessions? Okay, great. So moving on to the panel full. I think one of the first questions I want to sort of ask you about is emerging technology. We've talked and mentioned this morning there's billions of platforms and technologies out there. We're more focused, or we should be more focused on the solution. What is it we're trying to solve than the platform? So I suppose the question is, on a brass tacks level, how do you as a business evaluate new technology to see whether it's useful? And you can answer that any way you want. Stefan, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to come in from a slightly different role to Kate, perhaps, because one of my other roles is as head of strategic partnerships. So my role also is to work with other companies to build out these new products. So like the DALL-E thing was under my direction there for that. So for me, what we tend to do is I work very closely with our mergers and acquisitions team to actually look at potential acquisition targets. We work with the product team to see which areas of our business or our roadmap has got perhaps product gaps and what our competitors are doing and where perhaps partnerships can plug those gaps. So this perhaps is a level up from your question about the tech, but this is more who do we then decide to partner with. And also we speak to our support team, so our customer care team, and we get a huge amount of input from them because they're talking to customers every day that are frustrated or disappointed with certain products. So I would then work with a shortlist of potential AI startups and tech companies. I would then do limited internal betas with them. We would then take them to our customer base, so I would write the value proposition, the go-to-market strategies. And then we would just have a 3-month limited beta. And for us, the measures of success there were about adoption. So customer adoption, time for onboarding, speed to first bill, those kind of things. So slightly different things to just usage. And for us, it was all around how our customers engage with that bit of tech and then watching how they use that in life cycle of our tech.
So effectively, you're
saying
you need to test drive it.
Yeah, but we didn't. We gave it to our customers to test drive it and watch what they did and how the two interacted.
Kate, I don't know.
I guess there's two views to look at it from. So one is just in general emerging tech and looking at what's happening external to your business, external to your problems that you're trying to solve. And what we've found kind of useful so far is that actually kind of allowing, there's a risk it becomes shadow IT, but allowing people in the business that are enthusiastic or find it interesting or exciting to kind of take the reins to start off with, because I think there's a risk in tech of like you go, well, let's go and implement all this stuff, and no one really wants it, no one's really that engaged, and like, well, I'm not going to just force it on you for the sake of it. So allowing people to be kind of taking the lead on that internally, and you kind of coming in as a consultative function when it gets to the point where it's kind of serious conversations, I think is one thing. So letting that kind of happen organically. But in the actual buying process, so you've chosen kind of a problem you're trying to solve and you look at the different pieces of technology. There's two lenses we look at it from. So one is kind of a very objective, like RFP matrix. So you list down your requirements, you do a Moscow rating. Moscow is like a priority matrix, must have, should have, could have, won't have. With that in your kind of user groups, your personas we talked about earlier, who is that requirement for, why do they care about it? I will then look at the different partners and I will literally do ones and zeros. Who's got what? And I'll literally go, well, of our must-haves, you've got 90% of them versus this one. So there's a very objective, give me some data, give me some
So it's quite
maths.
a mundane process in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think so. Some of it, you try to, hopefully, if you've got people that are, and that's why we've got business analysts, and I'm a business analyst by trade, you kind of can pick that stuff up fairly easily. But then we also think about, like, there is an emotive element. I think denying the idea of an emotive decision-making in buying tech, I think, is just a bit of a fallacy. So it's also like, okay, well, what might that emotional response be? What things do we think we're going to care about? What might that be? And kind of going into that eyes open. And, you know, it's positive you get excited about something, but just then try and bring that objective reality of like, well, it's great, it's really pretty, we love it. It doesn't do like 90% of what we needed to
Well, I was going to ask both of you actually how, when you've made those decisions and you've run a beta or you've run a whatever, how do you approach taking the decision to possibly shut something down and to say, no, this isn't right, and what happens then? I mean, if you've encouraged, in your case, maybe 1,000 people to use a new tool and suddenly it's gone again, how do you deal with all those things?
Well, it's very much about being transparent with the customer.
Yeah.
This is a limited beta. We are testing it, you're testing it with us. So we had like a small cohort of enterprise customers that like to be involved in new technology. Probably the most recent example was we partnered with LG to do a reverse generative tool. So instead of text to image, so you write a prompt and get an image, this was image to text. You upload an image and it would give you a full human-sounding contextual description. And you could upload 1 million images and have full descriptions for all of them tagged and labelled in seconds. It worked really well, but what we did find through the beta, certainly the first couple of iterations, were some of the language and some of the labels, again, made us slightly uncomfortable. So we had to work with the customer and feed back to them, okay, this is version 1, this is what we like and what we don't like. So we actually shared our internal scoring system with our external beta customers. So the clients were also involved and could see what we were testing. So then when we went back and said, actually, we don't think this is commercially ready yet because of some of the language, particularly around ethnicity, et cetera, and they said, okay, great, well, we loved it, but we're glad to see you're making a decision and come back to us in 3 months.
And yourselves, Kate, when you talk about people internal, giving them a run at something, how do you deal with them when that fails?
Fun. I think it's, well, two things, same thing, transparency. Like you tell people, if you're speaking to a third party, this is our assessment criteria. And even talk about like, I think we've even shared the G sheet and been like, you can fill in the ones and zeros as to whether you're kind of able to do this or not. And it becomes an objective conversation of like, well, you can't do what we need you to do, so I hope you understand that. In terms of curbing the enthusiasm, that's a difficult one, and it's kind of potentially one of the other questions around skills gaps and bits and pieces. Is trying not to make them feel sad and like dejected and that you're not involved. We're working at the moment on doing some guiding principles, so it doesn't really get to the point where they've really gone too far down the rabbit hole, to the point where you're like, well, you're now buying a piece of technology that we've already got, or you don't need to do that. And I've kind of forgotten your original question. I went down into
It's just how do you deal with internal colleagues who feel dejected, basically, when you tell them you're pulling something that they've put heart and soul into?
Again, it's usually kind of fairly... We've got at Secret Escapes this year, we kind of launched a very strong 3 to 6 kind of strategy. And we've got very good this year of being like, well, if it's not one of the strategic pillars, we just have to say no, because this is being outlined by, you guys have agreed, you've bought into what this strategy is, you've said yes, so can you understand that we can't do both at the same time? So I think it's that transparency and being able to have objective, well, this is what you committed to, we can't do everything.
So you've hinted at something there, I think, underneath it. You've mentioned business processes, and I'd like to sort of expand that. So when you bring new technology in, how does it affect existing business processes? And do you have to adapt and change? Do you...
Yes,
can that be major or small? Can it
yes and no. So I think, one, again, we should be fixing business problems, not just buying tech for the sake of it. So I think it's being very, very clear on that. I think it's also okay to change business process, right? It's okay sometimes for the tech to be able to drive that, but you need to make sure it's well-intentioned, that you're actually doing something for the benefit of these individuals, and you bring them into that change management the moment you're even thinking about buying a piece of technology. Like, look, we see this problem for you, or we think this could be really helpful or supportive. Like, AI is the conversation at the moment, particularly kind of internal use as an internal employee of being like, okay, there are AI tools that would write that email for you rather than you having to do that, salesperson. Can you understand that would be beneficial? And they're like, oh yeah, one sec, I don't have to do the admin. This is great. I can just figure out what to sell and who to sell it to. This is awesome. So I think if you kind of go to that conversation, understanding their point of view, very empathetic to their experiences, that kind of helps if you're trying to buy tech to change the business process, sell it to them. I think I've become a salesperson in my job.
Well,
being able to sell that change.
I think we all are at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a couple of inherent risks in there, of course, and I think one of the big challenges with any kind of change program is project creep. So what tends to happen is you start looking at this new bit of tech and you end up thinking, oh, well, maybe we can change our business process as well. And then all of a sudden, marketing think, well, maybe we could do this at the same time. And all of a sudden, you're re-engineering your entire business and you've forgotten the fact that you're trying to implement some new technology. And then you're trying to change too many things at once. So I think some of the challenges I've seen before is not having, I think this might be slightly controversial, but perhaps a benevolent dictator, just sort of overseeing the whole thing. I think that's really
Hi, I'm
the sort of,
Kate.
is that you? Right, okay, there we go.
Joking.
But I think, some cases like this is where democracy sometimes doesn't always work. When you've got lots and lots of multiple stakeholders, lots of departments, all using centralised technology, particularly in a matrixed environment. And if you start changing one thing here, it's going to impact all sorts of other things everywhere else. So you really need to keep your eye on the prize and have one person that can say yes or no and have the authority to do it.
So how do you deal with moving people around? Because I think implicit in some of this is certain things become less important, other things become more important, and sometimes people get attached to their jobs, shall we say, and it gets difficult to suggest moving them. I mean, have you had to do that much? Or are your organisations set up to just continuously evolve?
I'll answer it real quick and then hand over to you. I think for me, it's not so much about that. I think for us, it was around, not so much people saying change the job, it was more about the process. So this is the way I do it. And I think one of the other big problems that we've always seen in change is what we think is the official process of doing things, and then what's the actual way people are really doing things. So those sort of product hacks, if you like. And I think those things are often overlooked in this. So actually, when it comes to changing policies and processes, you're often making people do more work or harder work because they've spent years trying to hack what you gave them in the first place. So you need to really work on that.
Yeah, I agree. The kind of system apathy, I think, is a bit of a challenge. Like at Secret Escapes, our employees are so tech literate. Like they really understand stuff. And so actually what we found useful is if things are changing and their job has changed requirements or they've got different drivers for success, adding in things like super users, and we have like an academy that we've got in kind of one of our pieces of kind of, we have Salesforce. We have like a little Salesforce academy where people that are sat in the business are being upskilled to be admins or kind of thinking about the BA side of things. And so, yes, okay, fine, this one part of your job is now automated, but actually you can do that automation. That's interesting and inspiring, and they can see how they can make changes themselves, and they then get really excited about other parts of their job, being like, well, what can we do here to improve things? As long as you're clear in that message of being like, well, this doesn't mean you don't have a job at the end of it. It just means we are using your brain that's super smart to do the things we need a human brain to do, not a bit of automation.
I think we said, sorry, I just went quiet for once. It's very rare. I think we said that digital transformation, doesn't really begin with the technology as such. It starts with business strategy. One thing Chris wanted me to ask you out of this was, in your current roles, how do you develop a clear roadmap, including the technology for initial and future initiatives, and what does that look like typically? So I don't know, either one of you can answer that first. You might not, you might just say, no, we just keep scanning and go. But
so, as I said earlier, the travel industry has had a difficult few years, and so we have been somewhat reactive to kind of like huge macro events like climate change, wars, all sorts of things that are even beyond really kind of our day-to-day. So we've had to be reactive to that to make sure we're looking after our customers, that they're safe, that that's who we're kind of focusing on. So we've been reactive. However, as I said, we've kind of launched this strategy this year. It's kind of a 3 to 6, it's kind of the next 3 years, what we're trying to achieve. So it's allowed us to have a bit more focus in our tech strategy, and we've actually now been able to get onto projects that we know are going to be big game changers. And so it's been kind of easier now. We've kind of got that focus to be able to have those roadmaps. I do think sometimes we don't move as fast as our users do, which is a really interesting kind of paradox sometimes. And so at the moment, kind of our roadmap, particularly in some parts of what I'm doing, is actually finally aligning these systems to how the business process had to change quickly to these macro environments that the tech just couldn't follow up on. So at the moment, it's actually quite simple what our roadmap is. It's trying to get it to where it needs to be, and getting rid of technical debt and bits and pieces has kind of been on our roadmaps more recently. But yeah, we've needed that focus to be able to have one that feels like it's going to last.
well, you never know. Stefan?
I'd love to give you a polished corporate answer, but the honest truth is, we have a bit of a plan because we know, as I mentioned earlier, sort of mergers and acquisitions shortlist and product gaps. But also, I'll just get a phone call say, oh, by the way, we just bought Giphy. Oh, right, well, that wasn't part of my plan. Brilliant. So, okay, so I've got to factor that in. So that kind of stuff happens. But also we are driven sometimes by the people that are buying content from us. So if we see that they're buying content from us to build something, we now will only sell over a certain amount of content to people unless we will only sell people over X amount of content for AI training models if they will let us resell the product they are building. Because we are seeing people building what could be competitive products. So from our point of view, our roadmap is fairly solid, but it changes because we might get a phone call, as we did in the last few weeks, from a company that was building a really intelligent piece of AI that makes music. And we're like, oh, that's brilliant, we should have that as well. So all of a sudden, everything's changed because we're doing that. So it's a little bit agile, is probably the nice way
Yeah,
to say
no,
we haven't
I
got a plan.
think well, less agile, more JFDI in some ways, isn't
Yeah.
it? And responding. And I think, is that then partly the last sort of 15 years of transformation has seen a lot of money made in large consultancies with big decks and big processes. So what you're saying is we're moving away from that effectively at the level we're at, in that we're not bringing the McKinseys in.
I don't know, there's still a lot of Deloitte people working at Shutterstock.
Yeah.
They genuinely are.
I know.
There's something about that, isn't there? Bring someone in that doesn't work here, and what's that? Lend them your watch and then ask them the time. I mean, I think it's some of the things, isn't it? Often an internal voice doesn't get listened to quite as loudly as an external voice, even if they're saying the same thing. But what it is good to do is have someone, so you're not checking your own homework constantly. So someone just to come and say, have you thought of that? Do you know that? And I think one of the challenges that we had originally at Shutterstock was most people at Shutterstock had only been at Shutterstock.
Right.
So having people come in from outside and say, hey, well, this industry price is like this, gives us a lot of new scope.
Do you ever use consultancy yourself like that? Or are you too small or agile? Or?
So we have used consultancies for specific things. I think the model we generally follow more is having partners that kind of are extra hands on deck. So we still have the decision maker, the strategy comes from internal, the people leading it, the product owner, project managers, whoever it might be, are still leading all those bits and pieces, but we might go, okay, well, we actually need some more Python developers. Let's go to a partner that we can have some Python developers for a short period of time. So that's the model we use. We do use consultancies for big things, but we haven't used a big consultancy for a while.
What triggers the decision to bring a partner in then?
Speed to recruit and speed we need to have to market to be able to get whatever it is we get.
And it is literally, we just desperately need this, we haven't got it internal,
Yeah.
bring them in. Because
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because, you know, a lot of business is partnerships and it is bringing third parties in.
The other useful thing as well around about pricing and how you, so I can't remember his name, Mark, we're talking about OPEX and CAPEX. I don't know if people know what the difference is in terms of those pricing. It's interesting about how you use that to your advantage because CAPEX is easier to get bigger budgets signed off on CAPEX. So if you can argue that the partnership you're using, whatever it is, sometimes you can get more bang for your buck if you are using the right budgets for the right things and with the right intention of those partnerships. So yeah, it's something to think strategically about.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? So we've talked partnerships. What about skills? Because we've mentioned this. But one of the hardest things, when you talk to people and go out, when I talk to people, they always say, well, it's hard to find people. And we've been talking about that out there, in particularly when you're trying to be more diverse and you're trying to find people from different backgrounds and skill sets. How do you track the skills you need? And how do you then turn that into action for finding the right people? Or is it just as simple as putting a job ad out and seeing what comes in?
Well, I'm not too heavily involved in that side of things, but what I do know is that at Shutterstock were very aggressive in acquiring AI companies 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the reasons for that wasn't just for the tech, it was for the staff. So I think in 2021, we bought 3 AI companies, which then gave us, I think, something like 60 data scientists. So we didn't even use the tech, we just bought the staff. But I think we're also seeing now, looking forward, we're not entirely sure what tech will be needed. Do you really need a huge team of Python developers these days? Who knows? So we've been able to solve that problem really through acquisition for the most part.
I mean, that's an interesting shift, I would say, from about 5 or 10 years pre-COVID.
Yeah, it's probably an expensive way to do it.
It is.
But you get 60 data scientists
60
really
data
quickly,
scientists,
which means
whereas-
you can do a partnership with OpenAI and build DALL-E. And that's exactly what happened.
How about yourself?
I think there's a level of strategy you need to think about in terms of skills. And I think there's different levers you can pull. So one is, like for like hiring, go to the market, get the people that have the skill set you need right now. That takes a long time. It's hard to find those people and they're usually pretty discerning in the kind of, because they know that they're in demand. The other way of thinking about it is trying to intentionally go for kind of more junior roles. Typically, at least what we've seen when I've kind of gone to market with different roles, the more junior ones have like a much more diverse. I think we had some roles recently. The more senior one was almost exclusively men hiring for it. The more junior one, it was about 60% women applying for this job. Thankfully, we also gave it to a woman who was very clearly the right person for the job. But I think you have to know that, okay, we'll go for someone more junior. Yes, they're going to be able to, they'll come in, you might need to work with them a little bit more, but in the 6 months it would have taken you to hire the like-for-like skills, actually they're where you needed them to be anyway. And then the other thing is thinking internally, like who are the super engaged people in your business that find tech fascinating, really interesting, have got the right approach to tech, can think about these problems, and there's so many of them at Secret Escapes that we've created these academies where we've then enabled them to go and kind of do online learning, learn how to use the systems. We then give them kind of small tickets to work on, or they become an extension of our project teams, so they can kind of pick up some of those skills as well. And also offering things like apprenticeships and bits and pieces are stuff that we offer at Secret Escapes as well. So I think it's about having a bit of a strategy with all of those different angles. And that's kind of allowed us to fill gaps.
How do you make sure this is the right thing, though? I mean, we were talking earlier about apprenticeships, and
yes,
you know, you've been involved in one personally, and you felt it wasn't the right one in the end. How do you ensure that what you're doing internally is right? Is it just that you see the feedback in the work that's been outputted?
I mean, so firstly, we see higher throughput. Like there just is more work being done, and it's of quality. We have things like Gallup surveys where people can give feedback as to how they're doing. We also do things like system usability scoring and CES for internal tools as well, which tells you that the work people are doing who understand the business better than we do as a team that kind of looks after lots of things, some of those changes are being more successfully adopted than other ones. So those are good barometers. In terms of the specific courses and bits and pieces that get done, I think it's also down to how those courses are advertised. I did apply to do an apprenticeship degree and finished after a year because it just wasn't actually really the level of kind of content that it was advertised as. And there's not really much I can do as a person to go and tell that academy to change their
You
marketing
could go out with a
documentation.
placard and protest.
Yeah, I haven't got the time. So yeah, I think it's knowing what's in your sphere of control and what's not.
And Stefan, yourself, I don't know how you approach developing people in that way.
I think retention is a huge thing, right? We're talking about how to attract people, but really keeping them is the big thing. And I love that idea of getting people involved in other projects, giving them some scope to use their brains and use their initiative and come up with ideas. And I think that's something that big corporate companies often forget, is that people want to be empowered to do things and have autonomy. We saw earlier that autonomy was a huge part of the intrinsic level of motivation. So I would always encourage you to think, firstly, what can we do to keep good people before you spend too much time trying to attract new ones?
Okay, let's roll on. Another question Chris gave me. In order to measure the success of transformation, what metrics do you track, or what metrics would you recommend people track based on your both obvious success in transforming? How do you measure it? How do you measure the effectiveness? Is it just purely market cap or customer numbers, or is there something more qualitative?
Well, it depends really on what it is. So there's, I think, qualitative and quantitative. So for me, the sort of quantitative pieces are very much tied into sort of sales KPIs, because if we are going out to sell this limited project as a beta, we want to see, you know, the typical top of the funnel sales metrics, demos, demo to proposal, proposal conversions, etc., renewals. But I think from a qualitative point of view, what's a big thing for us is ease of onboarding and how we can get these partners up and running without impacting our current product teams and our current roadmap. So that's more of a qualitative measure. But that for us is time to first use. So how long does it take from a first conversation with a salesperson to a customer actually using that bit of kit? And if we can get that in under 2 weeks, then we know it's something we can run with pretty quick.
Do you think that's a simple metric that's applicable across most of what we
I mean, possibly it works. I mean, I made it up. You know, it works for us. I wouldn't necessarily
but
read it in a book, but I think it's just about trying to sometimes just get to the point. You know, what is it you're trying to achieve here? And for us, it was like trying to get customers to use this tech quickly. So if they weren't going to start using it quickly, that's no good for us because we can't learn quickly enough. So it's about not being afraid to just boil things down. And I'm a big fan. If you can't measure it, you can't fix it. If you can't measure it, you can't change it. So try and distill things down to as few numbers as possible. Have 1 or 2 key measures and just watch them religiously.
But you fundamentally do believe in measuring.
Yeah, if you're not measuring something, you can't fix it. You don't know if it's going to work or not. And if it's just, it could be any measure at all. You can sort of make it up. You can even make up an equation for how you measure, which Again, it sounds mad, but it's a sort of 3 o'clock in the morning wild thought, but it does actually work. Something good times by something good divided by something bad. And if you were to think about that as a metric, you can actually create an equation to score anything that you want to do.
Kate.
So we use, I mean, everyone probably has heard them, OKRs, to measure some of our bits and pieces, and we think about lead and lag metrics. I think the biggest point is to measure the outcome you're trying to achieve rather than an output. Like, did you deliver something? Yes, no, okay. But did it have any of the impacts? Is the world different? How is the world different? So I think it's really trying to focus on the outcome at the end of whatever it is you're doing rather than did something get delivered? Yes, no. We then, particularly on an internal tooling perspective and parts of those systems that I look after, we do system usability scoring. So it's kind of a kind of a survey you send out. People will score how easy it is to use the system, which is quite nice, particularly for a UX-y perspective. We talk about customer effort score even internally. So I think CES is often branded as like your actual external customer, but I think my customers are also inclusive of my colleagues because they're the ones using the tools that I maintain and look after. So a CES from that perspective. We also then look at NPS as well, of how people are thinking. I mean, then we actually just go and speak to people, like exactly as you said, right? It's qualitative, but also finding out how they feel about it on a day-to-day level, what things are actually causing you problems, sit with them, shadow them, find out that sort of stuff. And then you've got non-functional bits and pieces like page loading times, kind of data storage, blah, 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 all those sorts of different bits
The
and pieces that are
mechanical
very
bits.
much, yeah.
And just to-
observability.
Sorry.
That's all right.
But just to last add on to that, and you can't do any of that unless you know what problem it is you're looking to try and
Yeah.
solve. And sometimes it's not technology you need. And particularly with artificial intelligence, I talk to companies from an ethics point of view, and there are times when I recommend, you know what, don't use AI for this particular thing. It's something like, I don't know, grading the risk profile of an at-risk child. You know, you want a human piece of rigor there to be able to describe and explain why a decision was made. And if you pass over to AI, you don't get that. You don't get to know why a decision was made. So there's a lot of areas where sometimes about not using technology as much as using it.
And to your point earlier, don't choose a metric you can't currently measure.
Yeah.
Amount of times I've been, oh,
Do people
do we
do
actually
that?
have that? Oh, okay, well, we don't have that metric. Okay, well,
Yeah.
we can't use it now, can we?
Yeah, and of course, if we don't measure it now, you can't compare. Are you better? Are you
Exactly,
going
yeah.
backwards? Yeah. So, but got to know the problem you're trying to solve, and then you can come up with some way of measuring it, and then
Yeah.
keep an eye on the prize.
I'm going to ask you two more questions quickly and then hand it out to questions because I'm sure now there's a lot of questions. What do you think the single most critical element for all these people sat here is in achieving success in bringing all this new tech and business process together and making it work?
I'll go first.
Yeah, go first.
Yeah, please. I'm thinking that's a big question.
It's massive.
I think it's so important to remember that technology is for humans. So make sure you are human focused in whatever it is you're doing. Like, I think at the end of the day, they're the ones using the technology, they're the ones inputting into it, they might be the people building it. So just remember that that's what you're there for and that's why you're helping people. I think people are excited about shiny things and new things, but does it actually help anybody? Like, is anyone happier at the end of this? Like, don't just do it for the sake of doing it. And think about the human beings at the end of it.
Yeah, and is it better? Yeah, you might be able to get a chatbot to write your sales email, but is it actually better than the one you would have written?
Yeah.
So I think there's a point there, just don't run to tech because it's there. For me, it comes back to those 2 points. Know what problem you're trying to solve, and then empower an agent in your business to solve that problem. And I think if you can do that clearly, then you can really start to put pressure on. Because it's that knife through, right? You can put a lot of weight on a very thin edge and cut through anything. So if you know we have got this one particular problem and that one person is in charge of solving it, then it's often a good way to get stuff done.
So empowering as well, right?
It is, yeah.
Clarity is
Empowering's
so
come up a lot
empowering.
today, empowerment, and you talked about that
I
a
did,
lot.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's hugely important because if you've got, what's that old saying? If you chase 2 rabbits, both will escape. And if you're trying to do that in a business and you've got a matrix environment where marketing wants something out of a product, legal wants something out of a product, finance wants something, no one ever gets what they want and it ends up being a massive failure. So manage expectations and know what you're trying to solve.
Okay, and one last, slightly more fun question. And it's just simply, what technology that is sort of appearing excites you most that's coming down the track?
From a work perspective, I actually think that the most interesting thing is that it feels like more tech is being built that's kind of getting rid of this gatekeeping element that I think really exists in tech. Like, you must have a computer engineering degree to be able to be in tech. no, don't, yeah, if you don't fit in that box. So I think it's really interesting and exciting that more and more tech is being built with this idea of actually anyone can manage it, anyone can do anything with it.
No code, low code.
Yeah, some
all
of
that
that's a bit of
business.
a fallacy, so just go in with your eyes open. Sometimes it is a sales line, but it is definitely the way things are moving forward. So that's really cool. From a personal perspective, I mean,
So what you're
Oh, yes.
saying is you no longer have to be a mechanic to drive a car.
yes, sure, let's say that.
Yeah.
But from a personal perspective, I do think like fintech is fascinating, and from a social ethics point of view, like empowering people to understand their finances and use that is like potentially a game changer in terms of socioeconomic kind of mobility.
Stefan.
I think, well, obviously quantum. I mean, we're all excited about AI, but AI will get us to Mars, but quantum will get us to travel at light speed. I mean, it's that much of a step up. But as far as actual real-life companies, there's a company called Artificio, which I will say, just a disclaimer, I'm an investor in, but we're using brainwaves to train AI. So rather than using imagery, we're able to now train an AI algorithm model to be able to analyze brainwaves. And I don't know if any of you saw it, we did a press release recently, but we are able now to analyze brainwaves and then generate the image of what it is you're thinking. So effectively what this means is we can now record your dreams and in the morning play them back to you. You can now watch your dreams. I can generate them for you. So that's a company called Artificio. I'm
No,
really excited about that. It's
fantastic.
got some
That
huge
shit's all over my arse.
repercussions. Yeah, it's terrifying. But the reason I'm involved in that is obviously from an ethics point of view, that could be absolutely terrifying. But the tech has been proven to work. So we're now going to take that.
Terrifying and
commercial world.
somewhat strange if they went in my head.
Yeah, well, do you know what the future applications
to.
could be, though? That we talked earlier about testing ads without needing actually
Yeah, no,
testing.
it's
A/B
absolutely.
testing is a totally flawed concept, right? Only knowing it doesn't work afterwards. But if we can actually look at eliciting certain brainwaves and brain patterns, then we can build ads that we know connect to those brainwaves and brain patterns, and all of a sudden we could do images and ads that are perfect for Richard, and an ad that's perfect for Kate, and an ad that's perfect for Stefan.
Generated in real time.
Generated in real time programmatically.
I think you should be a writer for Black Mirror.
Do you think? Thanks. Or maybe Black Mirror is just coming true.
On that note,
That's
I'll hand
it.
over to questions. We've got about 10 minutes before our next talk. Has anyone got questions? Right, there you go.
That went out.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Serhi. Will be speaking soon, so we'll have an introduction.
Of
I think
course.
proper introduction after that. So on the question of this Artificio, have I remembered?
Artificio.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So what about ethical framework there? Are you working on it as well? Like, what are your thoughts about how this might work out in the future?
Well, it's the applications, obviously, that are the scary thing. I mean, clearly, firstly, only using data with consent. Obviously, you can't just use someone's brain scans without their consent, but there is that. But it's very much about being clear about what they're going to do for. So I think, was it Elon Musk was doing eye scans recently in Times Square and giving away stuff? You know, that's really scary. You're letting someone scan your eyeball and you don't know what they're doing with it. So for us, the ethics was very much around controlling the data and being very transparent about how we're going to use the data. At the moment, we're using the data, and it sounds crazy, but actually it's helping with mining applications in South America, because managing brainwaves and training a model to look at brainwaves is also enabling the same model to be able to look through radar patterns. I don't know why they're similar, but they are. So there are different applications that aren't always just about reading someone's brain. But where we did put down some fairly strict rules are, would we allow law enforcement agencies to use it? No. Would we allow governments to use it? No. Would we allow politicians to use it? Absolutely never. Ever, ever, ever. So, you know, there's some very clear rules there.
How do you make sure that stays, though, right? Like, what if in 5 years' time we go, oh, maybe do want to share it with law enforcement? Like, how
Well,
do you
yeah,
make
I
sure
mean, you
that
have to
those things-
review your ethics policies, but there's just a governance council, and then we had an ethics committee within, and if there's any one of the following industries, then we have to get together and sign off on every individual opportunity. And we started out with politics. That was the first thing. We did this at Phrasey. It was at one of my very first startups, which was using generated content, and a lot of content we could write would guarantee people would open emails, and all the political parties wanted it, and we said absolutely not. So
Good.
sometimes you have to just draw a line in the sand, and politics is a very strong line for me. We won't get involved with that.
Aye, here. Any other, right at the back. Right, you are making me work. Today we'll get another kilo off.
Thank you.
Just say your name, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Silvio. Nice panel. Thank you. I heard you're talking about no code, and just wanted to have some of your opinions about it. Are you guys using it, or?
Yeah, a lot.
Embrace
We
it.
do a lot of no
Thank you.
code, low code. And actually, it's becoming a bigger part. So we've recently set up a kind of enterprise architecture task force, and it's now kind of one of the. So we're talking about guiding principles about enterprise architecture, what to be thinking about, and the kind of concept is that when you're doing your RFC or your design document, you kind of say which guidelines you're maybe choosing not to kind of go with, and your kind of reasoning for that. But one of the guiding principles will be try to make it as low or no code as possible, particularly the closer to the kind of internal users as it is. So it's becoming kind of a bigger factor of every piece of technology we're looking at. Particularly given the kind of capacity in tech is going to stay the same, but people want to adopt tech more at secret escapes. So yeah, when I'm coming in and helping people with an RFP, I'll be thinking about that, and those will be specific questions I will ask in the RFP demo of like, well, when you say it can be done by anybody, what does that actually mean? So yeah, it's a big part of our questioning process, and typically they'll get a higher score in terms of when we're assessing them, they will probably get a higher score if they are low or no code versus another alternative. Yeah, so that's kind of our process. And then in an RFC, do people know what an RFC is? Yeah, cool. It's a request for comments document that is kind of precursor to a design. Again, in that, we then have kind of assessment criteria within that, and people need to veto yes or no within it. And we try to have, we try to ensure that we have at least one option that is low or no code versus the others. But it's also not perfect, right? So just be aware that even low code is not perfect.
Hi, I'm Ran. I'm from Sainsbury's. Advice, if you may. What do you do if you have senior stakeholders that are looking to buy instead of build, but then other senior stakeholders or me as a product manager that wants to build instead of buy?
Mm-hmm. I would say product engineering have a natural proclivity to be very pro-build because, and this is my personal experience, I think they appreciate control and knowledge. And I think the knowledge and control that product engineering have is they know how language works, they understand all those different bits and pieces, whereas SaaS or low no-code is like a black box to them. So I think my experience knowing more about low and no-code technology has been bringing them on the journey. So talking them through it, understanding where that fear comes from, what do they think that means to them. It's kind of almost like a therapy session of being like, okay, talk me through that. What do you think is going to go wrong, or what do you think is going to be really, really, really bad if we went with a low/no-code option? I think also I look for senior leadership kind of buy-in who prefer kind of to buy versus build and understand that rationale with them as well. So I think it's consistency of message and trying to understand where that fear comes from. My experience has always been that they just like having control because it's something that they know and they feel comfortable with, and they've done it for years and years and years, and the idea of low or no code is kind of scary to them. Yeah, that's been my experience.
We have another question.
Hi, good afternoon, Nastasia from Digital Catapult. Thank you for the panel. I enjoyed it a lot. So I wanted to pick up on an area that you touched, and it's around the role of consultancies supporting companies like you in digital transformation. How are you seeing that? And also, where are you looking support for innovation, given your business type?
Is that to both of us? Okay.
Yeah, well, I guess I touched on Deloitte earlier. Obviously, there are plenty of other consultancies available. We've worked with them largely to bring in knowledge of areas that we're not involved in. So obviously, Shutterstock is very much focused on imagery, content, music, video, etc. But computer vision data, for example, is a relatively new field for Shutterstock. So we asked Deloitte to go and do market research, look at all of our competitors, see what their pricing models were. In hindsight, it's probably stuff that we could have done internally, frankly. It doesn't necessarily that they bought a certain skill. They had a dedication to it, and they had an objectiveness that perhaps we wouldn't have had. So from our point of view, it was just getting that sort of third-party market research, which was probably quite an expensive way to use them, frankly, because they really just gave us a report and said, you should be doing this there, but didn't necessarily then help us do those things. So I question the value of that personally, because I think we could have done that, and I think actually what Kate's done, rather than paying Deloitte a six-figure sum to go and do that research, we've been better off empowering some of our staff that are interested in that area and getting them to start putting together and having internal councils. But clearly that's just market research. I'm sure there's other specialties that they could offer that maybe, Kate, you can dig in. But that's, for me, I felt like it was an expensive way to get some market research, if I'm honest.
Yeah, so we exactly to the point you just said there, like I think you should find people in your business that are kind of interested in it. Like really, that's been the kind of big driver. Specifically consultancy stuff, I think I can only think of one time recently we've used an external kind of consultancy to kind of help us with, and that was off the back of trying to hire a person with that skill set for about 18 months. We were like, right, okay, we are wasting time trying to find these people. Let's go and speak to our network and find some people or find some potential partners that can fill this gap and can move us forward. So it really got to that point that kind of we've had to after quite a bit of pain. But in that relationship, we've then gone, okay, well, this is not just you telling us what to do. We are going to absorb all of this information now, and we're going to have people in the business who can understand and learn all of that, so we aren't completely dependent. Like, again, I'm not saying all partners are like this, because there's lots of partners that are really, really brilliant, but I just feel slightly worried about becoming completely dependent on one and not being able to remove them from your business. Because when it gets to the point of trying to cut costs, like third parties are usually where you look to first, like, do we still really need to be working with this one? So yeah, all about trying to invest in internal staff and yeah, desperation.
So I'm going to call it quits now for that. Can we say thank you? Excellent, thank you.